We're going to do a presentation that's case studies and a bunch of different robots over the years. This is going to be most useful if you have gone to or watched one of these presentations already. I believe Mike is redoing this presentation tonight. Both of these are really good presentations that take you from kickoff through a lot of season strategy things, but where you might have trouble is there's a lot of truths in there about trade-offs and that sort of thing, but there's not a lot of specifics in terms of where that line is for any given year. So we're going to look at some robots from previous years to help assess where that line has been previous years, and then hopefully you can use that to make analogies in the upcoming season about where you think that line of simplicity is going to be and try to design for that. So I'm going to steal a little bit from the workshops. One of the major takeaways from Karthik's workshop is essentially build within your resources. It's better to have 3 things that work really, really well than 5 things that don't work super well. And I expect you guys to go and watch that hour-long presentation over his stuff too much. The key takeaways from both of those, I think, is you want to show up ready and you want a schedule that enables that. That seems like a really obvious truth. A lot of people struggle with that, but there really isn't luck in FRC. Good luck, bad luck is mostly about how prepared or unprepared you were. Winding over the match schedule and stuff doesn't really matter. I would drive all your decisions during season around meeting schedule. If you guys are arguing about feature A or feature B, and neither is achievable in the time you have, that's not even the right discussion to be having. You should be talking about feature C that you can actually achieve in the time you have. And you can generally get away with less features than you think you can. Oh, sorry. I like this done but not finished by Sunday of week 4. That leaves you 16 more days. The robot won't be perfect. You probably still got to make a few more parts, test some things, but it nominally does what you want to do for that year and still leaves you plenty of build schedule to vary on that. So for you guys in California specifically, Mike's not doing his goal setting workshop anymore. I was gonna say Mike was gonna do a really good one on goal setting. You wanna figure out what your goals are for season and then figure out what kind of team you need to be to shoot for that. So depending on the size of a California event, if you guys are just trying to make a limbs, that's gonna put you anywhere between a 40 and 60 percentile team, meaning you are better than 40 to 60% of the teams there. Obviously you can be a much worse team at a smaller event and get picked. If you're trying to be an alliance captain, or picked on that 1st to 4 alliance, you're going for winning the event as not the 3rd, you need to be 80 plus percentile in most of these California events. This is kind of talking about, schedule and being ready. So you should not be really doing or solving any problems at the event. Ideally, you get to the event, everything works, and you're just playing your matches. I know that sounds really obvious and easy, but you should set your whole build season schedule up to get to that point, to where you are really done before you get there. And the way to do that is go simpler, and we're going to talk about hopefully some things that help you decide how to go simpler. I think we get into the teams right about now. All right, so what we're going to do, I think I got about 10 robots in here. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about each year because we just don't have enough time in the presentation. We're going to watch a match video from these years, then we're going to talk about why that robot was a good trade-off in simplicity for those years. And I think we probably don't have sound, so I'll narrate them. So let's watch this match. So 2005 was a pretty simple game in that you had 9 goals. You can only see about 6 of them here. Top-down view, that was like a tic-tac-toe grid. Essentially, you got 3 points for each little thing you got on top. And if your color was the most top of your goal, you owned that goal. And you could get rows tic-tac-toe style for 10-point bonuses. At the high level of play, it was kind of a trade-off between bulk scoring, just how many could you get on total, and how many rows you can make. The robot we're looking at here is 330. They were not quite a kit-apart drive. The kit-apart drive wasn't as refined then, but they did use the kit-apart gearboxes and essentially made a kit-apart drive. And then they were just a single joint arm past that. You'll see 2 pretty complex but good robots fighting over the middle goal here. This is actually 284 here, and then 67 over there. And they have an additional degree of freedom to reach this extra height of the middle goal. But what 330 reasoned through is that only 1 team per alliance really needed to contest that middle goal. You didn't need 2 on it. So they decided to go single joint and were able to do a lot of cool things with it. Hopefully we get this on camera here. They were designed such that when they drove up to a goal and hit the bottom, they're going off camera. We'll get them again. They would drive into the goal and just hit the bottom, drivetrain the bottom of the goal. And as long as they were roughly centered left, right, all they had to do was lower the arm and they couldn't miss. If you watch some of these robots, a lot of them are some arbitrary distance back from the goal. And that's a lot harder for the drivers to see. And that's something you got to practice that much more to get those. And what we missed 330 doing there actually is they were able to run all the way down to the field, like down here, and place on one of the opponent's goals real quick because they were able to take advantage of the fact that they just had that 1 degree of freedom. It's really easy to control. And all they had to do was drive into the base of the goal. You guys see them do it there? Not the best video, unfortunately. I think they just did it too, yeah. So they just drive into the base and boom, now they can't miss. They didn't even use a sensor on the arm. Obviously, these double jointed arms you see with 2D4 and 67 are running control loops to achieve that coordinated motion to do the scoring they're doing. And like, look at how much 2D4 has to move back there to get that on. And then they kind of jumbled it up. So they were the first pick in their division, and they won champs. They beat 2D4 either in finals or semis on Einstein. I forget. All right, we can probably jump out of the video now. This is one of my favorite all-time simple robots because it doesn't get much simpler than single joint arm that goes up and down with no sensors. So we talked through most of this stuff. You know, they're hard stop on the goal for the bottom of the hard stop on the bottom of the goal for scoring. So I would say probably a 50 percentile team could build this robot, which means the teams right now that are the last pick of the draft at a California event are probably capable of building this robot that won champs. And then competitiveness, obviously this is on the #1 alliance and won champs, so you could be highly competitive. We're going to see going forward in some of these years, unfortunately, you can't be #1 and super simple. All right, skipping a bunch of years to make it easy. This is a robot I really like. 2012 was a long time ago. First was quite a bit different. This was probably the toughest shooting year they gave us, and you simply could not be on the #1 alliance with a real simple low percentile team robot. But let's watch this match and talk through some of the stuff. So these guys were rookies that year, and they made a support robot. It was killer to try to find a good video for this. So I compromised, and we got this one from IRI. So pretty much what they would do the whole match is just try to help their partners out. And when that worked, that did a lot for them. So this year's game was kind of complicated. You had basketball hoops on each side. What they're going to try to do here is spit these balls out in auto for this other team to pick up and score. And they were able to do that really well in the limbs. This was a random claw match, so they weren't quite able to get that coordination. But that was super valuable because teams could usually score or not. The teams that could score would shoot there too, then they'd be out of balls. The teams that couldn't, if they could pass 2 more balls, that was generally 2 more makes, which was a big improvement. Next, you're going to see them come down here and lower these balls. You got basketball hoops on each side of the field, and you got this center barrier splitting the field. So they just lowered that bridge to knock these balls down just so their partners could grab them. No other reason. They decided to not have the ability to drive over that center barrier, which I think was, I don't know, something like this, Torrance. It's pretty gnarly. Probably
4.5 inches.
Yeah. No team was able to just do it easy peasy. You had to have some sort of solution for that. So they would cross the bridge to get over. What they're doing now is they're just stealing the opponent's balls and bringing them back. And that was often able to make a high-level scoring robot score, you know, in some matches as much as 50% more, because that high-level robot was not having to cross the barrier, which often would take a lot of time. Unfortunately, we're actually in this match doing terrible on the right side. That's a real bummer. I wasn't able to find great video of them at champs, but they were picked as the third for their alliance with 11, 14, 23-6. They won the division. There was some shenanigans in Einstein. They could have won. But for a year that it was incredibly tough to be a low-resource team, they had a great season. And everywhere they went, they were a desirable pick. And I think they won IRI with 11, 14, 28, 26. So coming up on the end, if you could balance 3 robots on this bridge, it was way more points than if you were doing 1 or 2. And that's really why they made a small robot, just so they could take up less space on that bridge, leaving more space for the other 2 robots to be big. Oh, they could self-right too. Look at that. Here we go for the triple balance. So yeah. So that was a team that really nailed it and did the best they could with a game that was really not approachable for teams that weren't super good. I think when we went to regionals that year, I'd say probably 90% of teams couldn't score. So it's a tough year. So I'd say about 50% of teams can make a robot like that. You know, maybe a little lower than that. Competitiveness, it was tough to be a first-round pick with a low-resource robot, but you were definitely the most desirable second-round pick of the good teams at the event. And there was kind of a cool thing that year of they were usually available in the draft because all the medium alliances needed another scorer. So at multiple events, they were available to be the third for the powerhouse scoring robots because other alliances couldn't afford to pick a robot that couldn't score. All right, so now we're going to jump ahead to 2013, which is probably one of my favorite years for simple robots because we could have picked, I think, literally 300 different robots for this role. This robot has 5 motors. Let's watch Galileo Semis. This year, it's pretty simple. You had goals on one side of the field, you shot frisbees in, you got your frisbees from the human player on the other side of the field, go back and forth, do it a bunch of times. I believe they're this back middle one, but we will find out once they start driving. They're with 118 and 1114 in this match. Yeah, it's these guys here. So they come over in the human load. Process-wise, there's a lot of advantage to simplicity. Simplicity isn't just the features on your robot. The fact that these guys designed a robot that only does 2 things, it shoots frisbees in the goals and it picks up just from the human player, means every practice match you play, all the practice you do at home, every quals and Olymp match you play, you literally do the exact same thing. So there's not a lot of overhead put into what are we going to do differently this match? What other driver skills do we need? Nope, you just do the same 2 things over and over. What's crazy, they were the last pick in this division. They were the 24th pick. By scouting data, they were somewhere around the 8th or 10th best scorer. So not sure why that happened because they were really good. And they only score a few less frisbees than the elite teams on their alliance. I think this is their 2nd year as a team.
I mean, they're losing to the world finalists.
Yeah, well, actually, they win this match. They lose the next 2. This was tragic. 1114's arm breaks 2 matches in a row after this. But the people they are playing, no, they're world champions. 6-10-1.
Oh, yeah.
I just love this team because there were so many good teams, us included, that had so many mechanisms and systems and stuff that weren't really putting up more points than this robot that really, had nothing on it. I think it might work this match. I don't know, though. It's been a while. They're certainly struggling with it right now. That was a sweet robot.
Skip 10 seconds and that's it.
Okay. We'll never know. So yeah, I'd say maybe a little higher percent difficulty to make. If this game was brought up 2019, I think the last few seasons have really raised the bar for a lot of teams. I think lower teams could make this. But 70 percentile is still, you're maybe the 18th, 20th team in the draft at a California event. So, most of the teams competing here have performed higher than that. What's up? Oh, sorry, that is kit apart drive.
Okay.
And that was a really smart decision by them. I know they ran a practice bot, and especially that first year you do a practice robot, it's really nice to make that kit apart drive because it's less decisions to make, it's less parts to make. You're able to make your comp and practice bot drivetrain that first weekend if you want to. You can start developing autos for years where you might need to do much more drive autos. And some teams eat up weeks doing custom drives. Because of the way frisbees work, shooting them was really nice. You could there was no penalty to just shooting them harder. They just flew straighter. It wasn't like shooting a foam ball where you went way over the goal. So they didn't even have control loops. I'm pretty sure they only had 5 motors. They had the drivetrain and the motor on the shooter. They just set to full speed. So very simple. Competitiveness, it could have been on the #1 alliance. They fell lower, but there were other teams like this that were the #1 seed on their alliance and stuff. All right, next year. I really like these guys. So 2014 was a really simple game. There's nothing on the field. Essentially, you had to juggle this ball, pass it back forth a couple times, and then put it on the goal on the other end of the field. There was a lot of defense, and there was a lot of priority based on good ball control. So I wasn't able to find a great match for them, unfortunately. So they're over here on the right side. They've got a shot blocker here at Champs. You were able to block shots in auto. I guess you technically couldn't teleop. It was just not useful. So many teams focused on having good shooters that their intakes and their ability to pass the ball to someone else were terrible. So these guys are rookies, and their robot was just an intake. Pneumatically went up and down, and then they had 2 wheels that spun to pick up a ball. They were able to pass balls like this. Actually, they could have gone bumper to bumper and not even put the ball down on the floor there. And just pass it to other people. And this looks really simple and dumb, but they were the 4th robot for the finalist alliance at Champs. And if we had been a little worse at Madera that year, they actually would have been the #1 pick for 2v4 at the 2014 Madera Regional over teams that were legitimately good scorers. And I mean, it would have been a lot cooler of a story in hindsight if they'd been the pick over us. because, I mean, a lot of teams probably had them, I don't know, 16th, 20th on their pick list, not hyping them high up at all. But they just drove well, pass balls back and forth. What was that?
You mentioned that every time you pass the ball, it adds points to when you finally shoot it at the end.
That's a great point. Probably should clarify that. Yeah, so essentially, if you ran down the field and scored on your own, you got 10 points. If you involved all 3 of your partners and threw it over this middle guy, you get 50 points per cycle. So obviously, you wanted to get all 3 partners in play. They had a great qual match where they just didn't have partners, and I think they scored like 8 or 9 cycles on their own. Unfortunately, the low goal cycle was 1 point a cycle. So they scored like 8 points in that match or something on their own. But they were really good. And they were the 4th for that World Finalist Alliance. They didn't get a chance to play, but if they got to play, they would have been just as good as that robot they were replacing. And there were a lot of teams that performed worse with far more ambitious robots. I'm going real fast, guys. I'm trying to make up for that time you missed. So please let me know if you want to talk more about it in these years or have questions or that sort of thing. These games start to get a little more complicated. So 2016, who was around for that? Just so I can get a feel for it. Okay, so not too many. Pretty complicated game. And this year threw a lot of teams off. A lot of teams spent a lot of time, first 3 weeks of build season probably, finally getting a drivetrain that could handle all these various obstacles. Essentially, there were 10 different or 9 different obstacles that could be in play there. You needed a pretty gnarly drivetrain to get across. What most teams eventually found is you needed an 8-wheel drive with 8-inch wheels or a 10-wheel drive with 6-inch wheels, which was kind of unheard of in first at the time. So a lot of teams were really hesitant to run that. And they wasted a lot of season schedule on that, and it really affected what was on top of a lot of robots. So essentially, you needed to cross 4 defenses twice, I think, to achieve one part of the game. That got you a ranking point or a bonus in a limbs, and it got you a good amount of points. The other challenge was, it's really hard to see, but you could shoot into the tops of these towers. There were 3 goals, or you could put balls in the bottom. It was 2 points for the bottom, 5 points for the top. At regionals, if you got, I know this is complicated, if you got 8 balls in, and then you got all 3 robots on the tower thing, you captured it, and that got you either a ranking point or in a limbs, it got you bonus points. So in a limbs especially, you could actually do pretty well just doing low goals because of all those various bonus points. And the other thing that I'm not highlighting yet is they were with 148, who was probably one of the point blank shooters. And what they're doing is kind of like what 43-34 was doing in those previous matches. You just saw a beautiful one there. They were feeding balls. So yeah, it'd be better to have 2 148s, but 148 in this robot was probably like 1.8 148s. They really make 148 a lot better. There were multiple times the 148 was able to shoot 2-3 balls without having to leave the zone and get another ball. And most of Team Dave's robot was a drivetrain and an intake. They also had a hanger that I don't know if we see him use it in this match, but they would have been 90-95% as good without that hanger. And they're definitely a story of like, could have won states. I think they were 1 ranking point away from being the #1 seed in their division at champs. They would have split up 195 and 987, who won their division, who were both super good. And their ranking point was to get that capture at the end of the match. There's 3 positions for robots. The robots had to be in unique positions. They had enough balls in the tower. One of their partners just drove on the platform under a robot that hung. And you couldn't do that. You had to go in 3 unique positions. So they were that close to splitting up 2 very, very good shooting robots. They would have been able to pick whoever was better. I don't know. Both were really good. And they probably would have won the division with that team. With a robot that, man, that was a tough year for shooters. I don't know. You guys spent a lot of time on your shooter. New for every event, right?
We had a new flywheel design and hood design every single event. Yeah, it was rough.
And I mean, teams spent so much of the season on drives, and then most of the elite teams are doing new shooters for every event. So being able to do this and just having low stress the whole season and practicing the same thing every match and not needing vision code and not being able to tune shots and not being reliant on your one practice field rotation to keep things tuned was really nice. These guys, 50% of teams easily could have made that. We saw a lot of teams like this that didn't perform as well just because they weren't quite there with practice and stuff. I believe we have to 130, right? I think in that video we just watched, they were like the #2 seed or something with 148. Maybe they're #3 seed. They were the #2 captain in the division. They could have been the #1 captain. So very, very simple robot. One of my favorite ones to focus on just because the disparity between this and the elite teams and the fancy reveal videos you saw that year is so huge. And as long as you got to play with one of those, you were pretty much just as good. Sweet. Let's go 2017. I also love these guys. Who was here for 2017? All right. So these guys just ran Gears. they couldn't pick up from the floor, and they couldn't place actively. They essentially had, that polycarb flap for a gear to fall down in, and they would take that to the gear peg, and the human player would take it out. And they were in our division. This was their rookie year. They used a modified kit apart drive. They just cut it shorter, and they were just absolutely incredible. I think they're over on the right middle, and they're with the lights, and they might miss their auto. I don't remember. But they get like 6 or 7 gears in this match, which was, I think the elite teams in our division were averaging like 4.5, 5 gears. So you're obviously going to have maxes above your average. And these guys are right there with them. And this robot, I think, other than their hanger, had no motors outside of drive. So they're already back scoring another one. It was just incredible to see this team perform so well as a rookie at champs over teams that had much more complicated mechanism and many more years of experience. I think they took the kit apart drive and just cut it a little shorter just to make that robot smaller. Sure. Is anyone counting? I think that's at least gear 2 or 3.
I think that was 2.
3 if you count their auto one.
Yeah. Let's go with 4 now.
And it was 12 got you 4 rotors, is that right? Because the 13th was in the tower. I don't know that we really ranked them on our pick list because they were just out of the top couple, so they were in that part of the list that it didn't make sense to sort. But if they weren't the maybe 5th best gear robot in our division, I'd be surprised. There were definitely robots that if you're like walking through the pit, you'd be like, that robot's better. But when it actually came to on-field performance, these guys were really good.
Yeah, 2017 is the year of the simple robot,
yeah.
Right?
And what's cool, they missed this climb by like half a second. They were down here, I think, at like 8 or 9 seconds. A lot of teams would be down here at 30 and still miss their climb.
Yeah, over here at 10 seconds.
And look at this. They're like an inch away, maybe. So yeah, I think this is probably the lowest % difficulty ever for simple robot. I mean, a lot of teams could make this in a weekend. What's up? So that year, like the hang that a couple teams did and then everyone immediately copied is you had rope with Velcro on it because Velcro was technically fabric or some bogus. And then you had a drum with the spiky side Velcro. You would drive into your rope. It would wrap up once or twice. Now the Velcro is not really taking load anymore because the ropes wrap around and you would drive up. So essentially you had a shaft that spun with Velcro on it. There were a lot of teams that just had a 1/2-inch hex shaft with a versaplanetary and they put the Velcro right on the hex shaft.
This is a versaplanetary to a chain to the drum.
Yeah. And that's the only moving part of the robot not in drive. So I don't remember how they did at state champs and stuff. I think they made finals or so, but these guys were better than, I don't know, probably 95% of teams with a robot that literally 30% of teams could make. All right. 2018 was harder to pick. I wanted to pick a switch bot, and I was kind of torn because switch bots didn't end up kind of being as good as people really wanted them to be. And then I couldn't really find a robot I wanted. So I liked these guys because they used the off-the-shelf claw design. So a little bit of favoritism there. They did 8 mechanism drive. That's not what I'd recommend. I would recommend a kit apart drive. And there's 3 or 4 different off-the-shelf elevator systems available now. They made their own elevator. I think for probably 90% of teams making elevators, I would go with an off-the-shelf elevator versus doing your own custom one. So where are they at in this? They are on red. And I think this is them winning the Georgia championships. So here's them there. Mostly I picked them because they actually started the season with this like vacuum intake thing and they went to an event or two and decided they wanted a new intake. And they figured at that point in the season, it was too late for them to develop their own. So they bought that configurable kit, dialed in a little bit, and were able to take advantage of what designs are out there to get a lot of improvement mid-season. I think they were maybe semis in their division. So I do this exercise with my kids, and what I want them to do is, have enough knowledge of these previous years and kind of find those points of complexity where it makes sense, to not be more complex than that based on the goals you're going to. And then, it's really hard on kickoff day and those couple days after, but do your best to go, okay, if I'm looking back at kickoff right now, in 4 months or a year or whatever, how is this going to compare to all these ones I've seen before? And try to remember that you can definitely get away with less features and less complexity and then bias towards more practice and more implementation than you think you do kickoff day. So yeah, just going over what I said, I'd recommend kit apart drive. I would use one of the 3 or 4 off-the-shelf elevator systems. I think now that all that stuff is available off the shelf, really almost any team could make a robot like this. I mean, if you just started and you have no mentors, no tools, you got the kit, you're in a history room, you got 4 kids, it's gonna be tough to do anything. But once you're past that level of skill, there's so much you guys can do now. And I think that is the last slide. Oh, so what if you want to go past this? What teams should you copy? These are kind of my 4 favorite elite teams. They seem to have much more of an ethos of, essentially what we just looked at, but aiming a little higher. Not to pick on 284, but they're fancy and they're very hard to copy, and they brute force a lot of things because they have the resources to do so, and that's amazing, but that's kind of a red herring for other teams to copy. That's not something I'd recommend. So 1114, especially the 2008 to 2014 era, a lot of really simple robots when you compare to the other elite teams that year. 1678, another good one, especially if you go a couple of years back. 330 has some kind of funky years mixed in. Recently, they've been making a lot of 3-jointed arms or an elevator with 2 joints. That's not simple. Don't copy that. But the 2017 robot was very simple. They just had a gear intake. It was a floor intake, but they were able to do that. They compromised by not picking up balls from the floor to make that easier. They were able to shoot and get the hopper and on them. Worked really well. 2056 is absolutely my favorite elite team to copy. There is probably no other team that is more aggressive about their schedule. These guys are done, no exaggeration, week 4 every year, ready to play at regionals. A lot of their autos that they debut at champs, they actually wrote before ship, is my understanding, and just never used them because they didn't want to show that yet. So I'm actually doing a presentation tonight that's kind of the same thing, but just looking deeper at 2056 and talking about some of the ethos of their team. For 95% of teams, I don't recommend copying these teams, but if you can't help yourself and want to copy a higher level team, these are definitely the ones to look at. All right, any questions? Yes, sir. 6705. And these all aren't necessarily the best one for any given year. They just all have some good talking point or story. There's numerous simple robots you can find each year, and that's a really good exercise to give your kids. I should have been more clear when I was talking about that. You can easily find 10, 15, 20 robots from each year that are probably good fits for your team. That you go, we could make this with our skill set now. Get your kids to really study what's good and bad about those robots so that you can try to do your best to make analogies to that on kickoff. Yes, sir?
Do you have any comments about maintenance that do things that make the robot more reliable?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could have talked more about that, but there's so many wins from going simple, and that is one of the big ones. The less stuff you have, the less to maintain. Hopefully, the more bandwidth you have available to make the stuff you have more maintainable, make better design decisions to improve ease of maintenance, I guess is kind of what you're getting at. You're practicing more, and hopefully you're seeing what's going to wear out and how you need to maintain it while you practice it. Whereas if you overextended, you didn't practice as much, and you might be experiencing the first time your intake fails at an event, whereas ideally you've seen that intake fail in that maintenance fashion a couple times in practice, and your kids already know, oh, I need to replace this. Maybe that results in a design change to wipe that out. Maybe it results in, oh, we know every 12 hours or so those intake wheels wear out and they don't work anymore. We should replace them after quals, that sort of thing. So you just have so much more time to focus on that kind of thing and practice more and test more when you go simple. And a lot of that's baked into, if you're really done but not finished on week 4, that remaining time really should be dedicated to those kind of issues. What's up?
So you described a lot of robots who compromised early in the season to have simpler priorities, simpler abilities. How do you describe 6-week build schedule? OP Robotics, you mentioned that a really aggressive schedule. The first 2 weeks, what should be done? That sort of thing.
I'm going to give you a really short answer and then say that I think Mike has that fairly detailed out in his strategic design presentation. I don't know if 2056's presentation is public somewhere, but I did rip off some of their slides from some event they did in Canada that covers that a little bit, and that's going to be the workshop tonight. A couple common trends you'll see is, either decide you're going to use the kit apart drive or have your drive designed that first weekend. I mean, literally by Sunday or Monday night, if you're one of the schools that doesn't have school on Monday, and have the ability to finish your drive completely within that first week or so, really, so that that's out of the way. You should definitely have the conceptual design locked in. I mean, you'll hear a lot of different answers from people depending on their ability to kind of brute force things. I would say within a week, 2 weeks is really pushing it.
You have to decide what subsystems you want.
Yeah.
Like very fast.
And you really need to start doing a fair amount of purchasing, configuration, or fabrication for your other systems. Really, I wouldn't put it off much more than a week. Really start assembly above the drive, about a week and a half, 2 weeks in. Shooting for it mostly assembled like week 3.5 so that you can kind of do some code and that sort of thing. I know that all sounds crazy if you're one of those teams that struggles to get it in the bag, but it's predicated on making those early trade-offs. Because early trade-offs, you get the benefit of the trade-off. If you make late trade-offs, it's not really a trade-off. It's really like a compromise. You don't get benefits of that trade-off is what I'm saying. It's tough to get the team to buy into that. It can be. It really needs to be a culture of, we're not arguing about what system we want. We're not arguing about how cool the robot could be, or this is my idea versus your idea. The focus of everyone should be, we have these milestones we agreed on, and the decisions we're making need to be able to meet those milestones, or we need to change the decisions we're talking about. Yes, sir?
Another question that small teams often think about is second and third robots.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean in terms of like where? Say that again.
Building two.
Oh, building 2 robots.
Or 3 or whatever.
Once you get enough resources, and I personally don't really know where that line is. There's a lot of advantage to building 2. I think you can get away with doing that at a lower resource point if you do it with the kit apart drive, because you get those 2 drives done right away, and you've wiped out half your fabrication. And in my opinion, there's a lot of value in removing decisions. Decisions can be hard for the group. If you use the kit apart drive, that's a lot of decisions made. Maybe there's something suboptimal about it for what you want to do, but it's done. You're not arguing about it anymore. It's what you're using. Depending on the year, I've heard of some teams taking some or all of their superstructure off and using it as part of their withholding. That can be a little risky from a maintenance and wear point of view, depending on how much you practice. And it can be stressful to install that at every event. But I've definitely seen teams get away with that well. I mean, you see it commonly with, like 2016, you probably had a fair amount of teams that had 2 drivetrains, 2 like short conveyors, and then 1 shooter. Because it can be tough to get a shooter tuned in, especially if you're kind of hand making a lot of things. It can be hard to get 2 that are the same. So they would take that shooter off from the practice spot, put on their comp bot, play the event, and then bring that back. I don't know. It's really tough to be competitive without the amount of practice that a practice bot can get you. I would say a robot that's half as good but has a practice bot that lets your drivers get that 50 or 100 hours of practice before you're competing is substantially better than the robot that's twice as good, but your kids drove it, 10 hours before bad. Is that kind of what you were asking, or?
Yeah, like especially build season. Like if you say we build one robot, it would be done and not finished before, but like we're still going to spend our 5th and 6th week building our second robot. Like what's the trade-off?
Ooh, God, this sounds really privileged probably, but I would recommend you make them at the same time. And if you're not going to make them at the same time, I recommend you actually make the comp bot first. What I've seen a lot of teams fall in the trap a lot of teams fall into is they make the practice bot first, and because it's the practice bot, they definitely make some trade-offs and concessions on it, and they let a couple things be crappier. And then they start running out of schedule on bag time for comp bot, and then they're forced to bag the practice robot that they had decided from the get-go wouldn't be as good. And then you kind of didn't really get the advantages you were looking for there. And then often the teams are behind enough that they didn't really finish the comp bot that is now the practice bot, and they've just spread themselves too thin and didn't get the advantage of both robots. And that's another reason that really doing the kit apart drive helps a lot. Being able to come out of that first weekend and have 2 drivetrains assembled. I mean, it's my understanding those take like 4 hours to assemble. Who's done one? Is that crazy?
I think me and 2 other kids built one and it was like less than a day. It was like a couple. It was like
Okay, so you could definitely get 2 done in the weekend.
Yeah.
Or at a minimum, 2 done before the end of next week, right?
Yeah.
And Now drives crossed off. You got sensors on it. Programmers can, a week with wiring, I guess, is the fair milestone. Yeah. But imagine it's 1 week in the build season. You have 2 drivetrains fully wired for future motors you're going to add for the superstructure, and programmers can start making it move and do autos and stuff. That buys you so much schedule versus pushing off that same testing typically to the end of build season. I think this is outdated
It's
now.
a little outdated, yeah. They weren't using them now,
So if you go back in time and use the kit apart drive, you can't buy anymore. 1114 has great resources on that. I think the Andy Mark instructions are actually pretty good now. I think if you take the kit apart drive, really for any year except like 2016 where you have really, really severe drive obstacles and just make it per the instructions, you're in a pretty good spot. I mean, when was the last time you guys made it?
We just built it because we just wanted to put our intake on something.
Gotcha.
So we didn't actually use a company.
And you guys just followed the instructions,
Yeah.
right?
I don't think we've ever used one company. It was just to put our intake on something to test how it really.
Which is
Yeah, it was
a great idea. I like that.
We just needed something to drive, and our drivetrain wasn't assembled yet, so we did that.
Do you feel that your drivetrain was appreciably better than a kit apart drive?
I mean, it was faster. And
Well,
speed was a big goal
you
for
can
us.
do that with the kit apart drive.
Yeah, you guys can switch gearbox, but for functionality,
As far as I know, you can take numerous off-the-shelf shifters, either from Andy Mark or Vex Pro, and put them on the kit apart drive with little or no mods. I believe if you do need to mod them, the mods are like put the gearbox plate on, lined up with the shaft, so you can't miss, and drill the mounting holes. I believe the Andy Mark stuff mounts stock. I mean, you don't need shifters most of the time, but you're able to do that. Because I know a lot of counterpoints a lot of teams have is like, oh, the kit apart drive doesn't have shifters, doesn't have nice wheels. You can replace the wheels as well with wheels from Andy Mark or Vex. They all use the same bolt circle. You end up using all the same spacers and that kind of stuff. You can make a 95 percentile. Actually, if you go back a slide, these guys in their prime, their drivetrain was essentially their own version of a kit apart drive for like 6 years in a row. It was different and it looked different because they designed it, but it was essentially the same. And that comes for free now. And you can buy another one for like $500 or something. It's really hard to argue against using that. Yes, sir?
It's designing a simple robot like learning basic mechanical functions.
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
It's designing a simple robot like learning basic mechanical functions.
Ooh, I would say no, just because when I say simple robot here, you're really talking about the robot as a representative of every decision the team has made in terms of how you program the robot, what are your team's processes for how much you're practicing, all the stuff you've learned about maintenance and that sort of thing. It's not just the robot as designed, it's the whole team and support system that was built around that robot as you were able to take advantage of that schedule and get all that practice testing and programming done. All right, well, thank you for your time, everybody.
Adam, do you have any stories off the top of your head of robots that were too complicated?
Like half the ones we've made. I don't want to pick on other teams, but I'm thinking of a lot.
I've got a couple too.
Why don't you go then, since you got them in mind already?
Our 2016 robot was a nightmare. We thought it'd be great to have a turret, and our driver just ended up turning most of the time. So the teams that just stuck a flashlight on their shooter and saw where their shooter was pointing worked almost just as well as our fancy phone vision tracking turret.
It was sweet, though.
Yeah, it's the coolest subsystem we've ever made, but it's really sunk a lot of the season into it. Any other?
I mean, you guys, every event you've been to, you can pick out a bunch of robots that clearly have more things on the robot than what they're doing on the field. And it's just obvious. They didn't finish all their stuff. So if they didn't finish all the stuff they have and they're not using it, that means they put resources into something that's not adding value. They could have done less things and used those resources they splurged to make those less things better. Yes, sir?
Any advice on simple guidelines to keep things simple so that you can put the e-board on and not have to rewire everything? Is there places that work particularly well?
That's tough. I think one thing you'll commonly see on a lot of these really good teams when you come and look up at their robot, you're like, wow, you just have less frame than we have, and you just have less stuff. And it's really hard to communicate, hey, just put less stuff on it. maybe that comes from better planning. I don't know. That's kind of you get there and learn that skill and look back and you're like, why did we have that issue at all? I don't understand. So I don't know the magic bullet there, but just less stuff helps a lot. And, having the time to think through those things so that you can ask that question and solve it without wasting build schedule you don't have. When they're doing, hey guys, we're going to have to access the electrical panel. How are we going to do that? Okay, your answer was not very good. We need a better plan there. And hey, since we're only doing XYZ, we got plenty of time. Let's solve this because we're going to get to our 5th fall match at the event and we're going to lose it because of this issue. And it doesn't matter how good the intake and the shooter and that stuff was because we're going to lose it because of this issue, which also can be a good exercise that I've had the kids do. Go back and look at why you lost all your matches. And there's going to be the matches where you were playing 2v4 and you could not win. There's going to be a bunch of matches where it's like you essentially didn't work and you lost for some trivial thing that wiped out all the value of your better things. What's up?
Right, so another simple robot that I can think of is that when our team went up to
Who are you guys?
the Dark Matter 2642.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we went up to Canada for CPR, Canadian Pacific
Mhm.
Regional, during on season, and in the quals we saw this robot. It was a rookie robot. It was literally a wooden box with like a.
What year was this?
This was this year.
Okay, 2018.
Yeah, 2018.
Do you remember the number by any chance?
I have it on my phone, but it was literally just this wooden box, and we kind of laughed at it at first. I was like, oh, it's literally.
I think you got to search for Canadian Pacific.
Yeah, but it ended up taking everyone's ass out on the other lines because they were stupid efficient at switch control. They were team 7190.
7190. There you go. Spooky Action Robotics.
Templeton's like.
You just missed them. Oh, no, I'm wrong. I'm reading 7170.
Yeah, actually.
Oh, there's no image. Oh, because it's showing 2019. We'll get it. There we go. Let's see it. Come on, Woodbox. Oh, no. But yeah, what you're doing there is another good exercise. Just have your team as a group go back and look at these games and find those and talk about them. And,
Yeah, there you go. On the right, that one right there.
try to find teams that seem to have about the same resources you do. And when I say resources, I mean money, machines, student talent, mentor talent, all of that, together is the cost of your robot. Find teams with similar resources that seem to use them at 100% and go, that's about where we are. We should be designing robots that look like that. Are they this guy there?
Yeah, no, they do it right here. They got a cute.
Are they like an every bot or?
It's like a hack bot.
Oh, they're one of the conveyor ones?
No, flip.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong team.
It's literally just a wooden box.
Yeah, with one hit. It's awesome. We could flip it up onto the box, or was it like a?
Not onto the scale, no.
Like they flip it into
Look
the
at this,
water.
you're totally every bot on the Switch right now, dude. They got the Switch.
They have to go to.
Let's see, did they win this?
They made finals, didn't they?
Yeah, they got second place in the entire CPR.
But they have to go back to they have to go back to like the exchange. Yeah.
Okay, well, they were.
I mean, there's always trade-offs.
Right.
That was a lot harder to make than a fully functional intake. Sorry, that was a lot easier to make than a fully functional intake.
They lost.
They might exist in that gap where they could not have made a robot with an intake to do what they needed.
So the belly cam question, some teams I've seen that do electronics really well. I mean, obviously we have another workshop on that, but if you can make your entire belly pan as an enclosed unit and you just take some compromises on, like, okay, no matter what, we're just never going to put a subsystem that is going to go right here, and you make that compromise early, and you can start wiring early, you can spend so much more time to higher effectiveness. I've seen people that put the belly pan upside down, both because it's hard to get to the electronics if you have superstructure over it, but also it just makes a clear demarcation that you have this ability above for superstructure and drivetrain is everything below.
And that was really popular in 2017. So you just flip the robot in the back and they'd pull off like a thin polycarb panel, then all your electronics are there. And you also got more surface area that way than if you had done it up. But I mean, that's another reason I really like the kit apart drives. If you go 2 kit apart drives, putting a plywood belly pan on here or plastic, if you really don't like the plywood, plywood's fine. Get that fully wired up. Assume we're going to have 4 more motors, 6 more motors, whatever. Get all that in there so that you're just running extensions past that point. Have the programmers write that code and just plug a motor in and test. Okay, that works, that works, that works. I mean, you've probably spent a lot of time robot done, and the programmer's like, okay, we're ready to test. And like, that's not making the right motor spin. Now you're chasing down, like, maybe it's a code issue, maybe it's a wiring issue. They find out they've been downloading the wrong code, and then they find out the wiring's wrong. You could do all of that way earlier in season. Yes, sir? Well, that's great.
Valuing end game,
Mhm.
often the end game is like this complicated, basically unique subsystem.
Mhm.
Always. If you're planning on building a simple robot, should you plan on end game just because it's usually tied to ranking points and it's hard to do that?
You know, it varies year to year. There's years like 2016 where maybe skipping the main game of shooting and just, doing balls and then having a hang would be a better compromise. Shooting can be real tough, and that you have to keep that distance calibrated in. If you have vision, there's a lot of code tied up, and the camera outputs this, therefore my flywheel needs to be going this speed and that sort of thing. There's years where endgame's super prohibitive, like this year, and it would be the better one to skip. It's hard to say universally what's better, but I mean, everything should come back to you of, hey, does this seem like something we can get done? Does this concept seem achievable? If it doesn't matter if it includes the end game or not, because we can't do it either way. And keep bringing the conversation back to what you can achieve. I don't know. And there was
I
like
will say
2030.
that
Sorry.
Oftentimes, like end game, the ability to do autonomous and end game are often the differentiators.
Sure, yeah.
If you're on a lead team that's looking for the third robot, usually it's hard to stand out unless you've got ridiculously good defense
Mhm.
or a solid end game or autonomous mode that augments what
Yeah.
the first two
I guess
robots
what you want to check there is there's years where the third being able to score 10, 20% as well as the first robot is valuable. And they can score 10, 20%, and that points help a lot. There's years where that's useless, and there's no point to having a third robot score. So you want to make that comparison of, is it better to be mediocre to bad at the main part of the game and not have an end game? Or is it better to just skip the main part of the game, play some support role, play some defense, whatever makes sense, and then have a great end game? It's going to vary year to year. And it depends on how many robots can participate in the end game. Like, 2017, 3 robots had to hang. Would have been a lot different if only 2 had to hang. You couldn't get picked as a third in 2017 if you couldn't hang. If there were only 2 ropes out there, then obviously I think you see a lot of teams that wouldn't have had to hang.
simple 10-point hanger.
Yeah. And then 2013 was kind of a red herring in that there was a 10-point hang. Essentially, you needed to raise the robot an inch off the ground. There's a 30-point climb that involved like climbing a ladder. Very few teams did that. Almost everyone did the 10-point hang. Like, you couldn't get picked without a 10-point hang unless you were just stupid good.
Ooh, cheesecake alone.
Yeah. And like our pick at LA that year was crazy because the 24th robot, if you just averaged their points, was averaging 7 points a match. We changed their auto to shoot for the middle goal instead of the high goal because that was a little easier. That got them, I forget, 10 points, 8 points or something. They hung at the end of the match. That got them 10 points. We like tripled their average. We are out of time at this point. We can probably sneak in a couple more questions and then let's get out of here.
You could stick after.
Yeah, I can hang around as well. Sweet. Thank you all for coming. Hope it was useful.